Hello, viewers, and a very warm welcome to today's episode of the Indian Lawyer Legal Tips. I am Sushila Varma, Chief Consultant at the firm. Today we bring you an act which is of great relevance in today's corporate world, and this is the Posh Act. Posh is an acronym for Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. This act is based on certain guidelines that were set by the Supreme Court of India in a very famous judgment known as Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan, decided in 1997. What this act essentially does is that it tries to protect women from sexual harassment at their workplace and defines what constitutes harassment in workplace and also establishes procedures for the redressal of this. Now, let us understand first what constitutes sexual harassment under the Posh Act. Essentially, it would mean any gesture, act, or even physical advance that would deem to be of such a nature that it would be a sexual harassment for the person who has been aggrieved. There are certain instances that are mentioned in the Act. These are reproduced on the screen below. Now, who can file a complaint under the Posh Act? Any person who is an aggrieved woman who has been subjected to sexual harassment at the workplace can file a complaint under the Posh Act. This would include women employees, whether permanent, temporary, ad hoc or contractual. It would include women working as part-time, full-time interns or volunteers, and it would also include domestic workers or house helps. Now, where does the complaint have to be filed? The complaint would have to be filed in the internal committee, which is also known as an IC, within 3 months of the occurrence of the incident. Now, where does the Posh Act apply? The Posh Act would apply to every organization that has 10 or more employees. Now, what is the internal committee? We've already discussed earlier, but who forms the internal committee? The internal committee would mean a committee which comprises of a presiding officer. It has at least 2 members from the employees, preferably women committed to women's rights or legal knowledge, and 1 external member who could be from an NGO or any organization which works with social work or women's rights. At least 1/2 of the total members must be women. Now, what are the duties of an employer under the Posh Act? I would say primarily the first duty is that the employer must ensure that he or she has created a safe working environment for the people working for him or her. Now, apart from that, there are also certain other responsibilities such as displaying the penal consequences of sexual harassment in and around the office, conducting awareness programs and workshops, establishing an internal committee for redressal of any complaints, and of course assisting the police if a complaint has been made by an aggrieved person. The employer also has to submit annual reports on the status of complaints that have been made to the internal committee in his or her company, and these reports have to be submitted to the district officer at the end of the year. Now, let us understand what are the penalties for non-compliance with the Posh Act. The Posh Act being a relatively new act, the first fine would be a fine of rupees 50,000. In the event that the violation is repeated again and again, this particular amount can be doubled and can also lead to cancellation of the business licenses or registration of the company that is concerned. Now, one more thing that would come to everybody's mind is, can the internal committee's decision be challenged? The answer is yes, you can. The only thing is that if you want to challenge a decision of the internal committee, you must do so in the appropriate court or tribunal that has the jurisdiction for the company, and this must be done within 90 days of receiving the internal committee's recommendation. The next question is, are men protected under the Posh Act? Sadly, this act does not cover men. But I have been given to understand that now people in several companies have started listening to harassment complaints made by men, and these are also being looked into by the internal committee. But as per the law, the Act only covers women. Now, what is the procedure for filing a complaint under the Posh Act? The aggrieved person must file a written complaint to the internal committee, and that too within a period of 3 months. The internal committee can, of course, extend this period to another 3 months if there are valid reasons. However, the internal committee must conduct an inquiry which is similar to disciplinary proceedings. That is, the person who has been accused must be given a chance to show cause and then give an explanation as to whether the aggrieved person has made a valid complaint or not. Both parties are, of course, given an opportunity to be heard. The internal committee, after hearing both parties, completes the inquiry and within 90 days submits its report to the employer. Now, what are the remedies that are available to the aggrieved woman? The internal committee may recommend transfer of the complainant or the respondent to a different department. The internal committee can grant a leave of up to 3 months to the complainant in addition to the regular leave. Sometimes the internal committee also gives monetary compensation for the mental trauma, emotional distress, medical expenses, and at times even loss of career opportunities. Now, can an aggrieved person take legal recourse outside the Posh Act? Certainly, under the criminal laws of the country, any woman can go and make a complaint to the police that her modesty has been outraged by an offence of sexual assault or by any gesture which would deem to be sexual harassment. Now, I would like to discuss the landmark case by which the Posh Act came into being. This is what is known as Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan, 1997. This was a landmark case, and because of this case, the Supreme Court laid down the foundation of laws for addressing sexual harassment at workplace. In this particular case, one Bhanwari Devi was made a victim of brutal gang rape only because, as a social worker in Rajasthan, she was trying to stop a child marriage in her village. Despite her best efforts, the police refused to lodge a complaint, and this obviously led to a lot of frustration. Eventually, a few NGOs heard about this case and they came to the rescue, and they collectively filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court of India, which was led by an NGO called Vishaka. The Supreme Court, after considering all aspects of the case, held that sexual harassment violates a woman's fundamental rights to equality and life under Articles 14, 15 and 21 of the Indian Constitution. The Supreme Court, while delivering its judgment, recognized sexual harassment at workplace to be a violation of a woman's fundamental rights. The court then issued a set of guidelines which were known as the Vishaka Guidelines. This ultimately culminated in the Posh Act, that is, the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act 2013. This was a groundbreaking case that was recognized and became a big discussion point for human rights violations, which ultimately led to the passing of an act that ensures safe working environment for women. There are, of course, many cases that have been filed under the Posh Act. There is one case that came up recently in the Supreme Court of India, which is We the Women of India versus Union of India 2023. This petition was again filed by an organization called Initiatives for Inclusion Foundation, which sought directions from the Supreme Court to ensure that effective implementation of the Posh Act should take place across India. The petitioners argued that despite the existence of the Act, there were significant gaps in its enforcement, especially when it came to the constitution of the Internal Complaints Committee or Local Complaints Committee or the appointment of district officers. The Supreme Court thereafter ordered all states and union territories to undertake a time-bound exercise to verify the constitution and proper functioning of ICCs and LCCs, that is, local complaints committees as well as internal complaint committees. The National Legal Services Authorities and the State Legal Services Authorities were directed to develop modules for workshops and awareness programs. The court instructed the government to ensure that information about Posh Act, including the procedure for filing complaints, is readily available on all government official websites. The recent judgment by the Supreme Court of India highlights the compliances which need to be undertaken for the enforcement of Posh-related offences. With this, I will conclude, and in short, I would like to state that if any woman who is working in an organization which has more than 10 employees feels unsafe or feels subjected to unnecessary attention, she can approach her employer and make a complaint. If she is serious about pursuing the matter, she can then take it up with the internal committee and the matter can proceed. However, I feel that in today's modern day and age, when women are so bold, women should not feel cornered. If any man makes advances, they should give it back right and proper. If you have found this video useful, please like, share and subscribe. If you feel that it would be useful for other people, please share it with as many people as you can in your social circle. Thank you and happy viewing.